Let's have our panelists make their way up. And then I'd like to introduce Rich Verma. Rich is the Chief Administrative Officer at Mastercard and a former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State and U.S. Ambassador to India, a veteran diplomat, business leader, and Air Force veteran. He brings extensive experience at the intersection of global business, public policy, and international affairs. So please join me in welcoming Rich Verma, and he'll introduce the next panel.
Well, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and ask my panelists to come up on stage as well, and we'll do the introductions, and we'll keep everything moving as we set up the chairs here. But let me just say what an honor and pleasure it is to be here to moderate this discussion. Let me also just say it's great to be home. Now, some of you might ask, why are you saying it's great to be home if you live in Washington, D.C.? Let me just say that 61 years ago, you welcomed my mother and father, two school teachers from India, to Edmonton, where they lived and raised a family, and where I was born. And my dad would teach at the University of Alberta. My mom was the assistant librarian at the University of Alberta, and they loved being here. My siblings loved being here. And I love coming back to Edmonton, which is my birthplace and my home. So thank you very much. So obviously, we're here to talk about trade in the global environment, but particularly North American trade. And when you think about what's going on in the world, when you just open up the newspaper and you see the conflict and you see the economic disruption and you see disruptions from our supply chains and climate risk and so much more, it is quite easy to become depressed about what's happening in the global economy. But at the same time, if you look at how dynamic and innovative the global economy is and how much innovation is taking place and new technologies with AI and other inventions and innovations that are taking place, it's also an exciting time. And that is absolutely the case here in this region in particular. These issues are not abstract. When I think about North America trade, I think about a third of the world's economy resting on North American trade. I think about $30 trillion in GDP. I think about millions of workers whose jobs depend on this. This is by far the most effective trading bloc and most powerful trading bloc in the world. But the challenge is, where do we go now? Because this is a challenging time, and it's a deeply integrated economy based on these longstanding relationships, as all the prior speakers have talked about. And it's also about looking outward. How do companies and organizations navigate this particular time? And it's not about choosing global opportunities over North American trade. It is about how do we continue to build and preserve on the advantage that we've been given to have this great foundation that we have here. But we also need to broaden how we think about trade itself. Trade today is not just about goods crossing borders. It is increasingly about data, technology, services, talent, trusted infrastructure, and the rules that enable businesses to operate securely and efficiently. And there are questions that we have to resolve around digital trade, around data governance, around regulatory alignment, yes, tariffs, and so much more. And that's why this panel brings together such a strong range of perspectives from business, trade, workforce mobility, energy, and economic development. And our goal today is to explore what this changing global economy means for organizations operating in the Penn-War region and what governments and industry can do to strengthen resilience and competitiveness, and where do the greatest opportunities lie over the next 5 to 10 years. So we have a great panel. So let me just introduce them real quickly, and I won't go through their long and distinguished bios. but Dan Ujczo, he's the Associate General Counsel for Cenovus Energy. Dan, you want to raise your hand? There you go. We have Adam Legge, who is the President of the Business Council of Alberta. We have Melisa Drugge, who is the Business Services Director at Business Oregon. And we have Victor Thomas, the President and CEO of the Canada-India Business Council. And Stephen Cryne, the President and CEO of the Canadian Employment Relocation Council. So we do have a terrific group, and I am going to sit down and ask the first question here. All right. Successful transition from podium to seat. So we don't have a whole lot of time, and we have all this expertise, and you are also encouraged to ask questions through the app, which I'm told you know how to do, and they will magically appear in front of us at some point. But all right, let me just start for a question with the for the entire panel. And obviously, as has been already talked about, and as I talked about in my opening remarks, North America is operating in a very different trade environment than it was just a few years ago, to say the least. As organizations navigate this kind of greater geopolitical uncertainty and evolving trade policy. So they've got geopolitical uncertainty on one hand, they've got trade policy dynamics on the other. What do you see as the biggest shift in how businesses and governments should think about competitiveness and trade going forward in this environment? A small question, which I'm sure you can all tackle, but let's just start right here. Adam.
Thanks, Rich. Good afternoon, everyone. And I think we're dangerously at risk of needing some more real estate up here with this small stage, but a few things. I mean, you talked about the uncertainty, the global order that we have really come to rely upon has shifted. It's in many ways altered. So those things like NATO, G7, all of those institutions are meeting, but they're not as successful. And I think that speaks to the importance of organizations like Penwar, is because when governments and nations can't figure things out, if there's one thing I've learned is that business and economic developers can figure it out. I sat on the World Chamber Federation, and we had tables where we had Iran and Israel sitting side by side from a business standpoint. So I think really connecting the dots on looking to business organizations. Secondly, I would say artificial intelligence is something we've heard a little bit about today, but I don't think we've really leaned into it as much. And I think that is shifting the landscape. There's so much risk that's coming with it, whether it's things like Mythos or autonomous drones and all these sorts of things, but huge amount of potential to drive productivity, investment, performance, and economic development. So we need some guardrails around that. But I think artificial intelligence is a critical piece. And then finally, I would just say to my fellow Canadians, let's not lose the moment and go back to sleep assuming that everything will be just fine. We have to realize that the president has sent us the best wake-up call we could as a nation to address our complacency from an investment and economic development standpoint. Let's not miss that moment and go back to sleep. So let's seize it while we have.
It's really important points. And I think your first point in particular about businesses can find their way during this time. And sometimes what I've seen is as the government relationships between certain countries might go into, let's say, a stalemate or a cold freeze. You see plenty of innovation and trade still taking place between businesses. So thank you for those opening comments. Victor.
Ambassador, great to be here. Thank you so much to Matt. Matt Morrison, 36 years has been the visionary behind this. And I just want to give, I know he's getting some attention on Wednesday, but give him a huge round of applause. Brandon, thank you for your leadership and congratulations on your new role. I think it's important to understand that as of February 24th, 2022, The world had changed when Russia unlawfully invaded Ukraine. And then we saw again on February 28th of this year with the war with Iran, the world has changed, and it's changed that the geopolitical now leads the economics. If you think back before that, if you had a good economic decision around the world, you can make it and move ahead. Now you have to work to understand the geopolitical. Just to give you a sense of that, in Russia, because of that unlawful invasion in February of 2022, you have companies from BlackRock to McDonald's no longer in Russia. It wasn't an economic decision. They were there, they were making money, but they are no longer there today. And the same can be said of what's happening in the Middle East because of the geopolitical uncertainty. This is a region that should be able to provide that certainty, should be doing more with the world, and should be able to understand the geopolitical and how this region can actually affect and help it from an economic standpoint.
It's a great point. When you look at the Business Roundtable survey of CEOs, geopolitical risk used to be 5, 6, or 7 on that list. It is now number 1 in repeated surveys over the last year or two. Thank you, Victor. Melisa.
Thank you. I think this is the mic that goes up and down, so that'll be all right for everyone. Well, first I want to say thank you for inviting Oregon to the stage for this conversation. I think this is one that probably is near and dear to everybody's heart in the room. There's different impacts in terms of who you work for and who you work with. And I think there's been recognition throughout today on all the keywords around diversification, uncertainty, resilience, collaboration, all those things that are so important to economic development. But if you're taking a look at Oregon and you know anything about Oregon, you know we're not a very big state, and we certainly aren't a state that's a giant in commodity export, but we are a trade dependent state. So these changes that we talk about and impacts to our businesses and the uncertainty, I think when we look at that as a state government and an economic development agency, we look at it from a standpoint of how are we going to support what we think is probably an ongoing change and really never coming back to what we would consider norm of doing business even 2 years ago, or even to Victor's point, in November of 22. So you made a really good point, Victor. I'm glad you did it because it aligns perfectly with what I wanted to say. But I think in terms of our agency, the way we've looked at this is that we've always been partnering with businesses to learn what they need and to support them in what they need as it relates to trade. But I think what's more important for us now is to really actually even shift to expose them to new concepts and ideas around new markets and what else they can be doing to diversify. We want them to still be looking at their products and their specialties, but what else can we be doing in terms of introducing them to relationships and growing their circular model around other global markets. So it's a challenging time for everyone, but I think the key message is really to be thinking about the client that you serve and who you support and who you work for, because at the end of the day, I think everybody in this room would have the same message in how we do this, and we do it collectively and together.
That's a great message. Thanks, Melisa. Dan, over to you.
Well, thanks, Rich. And again, I'm Dan Ujczo with Cenovus Energy. Now, our mothership is here or in Calgary in Alberta. I'm based in our U.S. headquarters in Columbus, Ohio, and part of that team as well. So you've heard a lot about energy this morning, and you're going to hear even more. Heather has some great roundtables coming, and we have a roundtable tomorrow. But just in a nutshell, Cenovus is Canada's second largest producer of oil. But where we're a little bit different than our brothers and sister entities here is that we have extensive refining operations in the United States. So 2 of which are in Ohio, which is why we're in Columbus, Ohio. One is our refinery in Lima, Ohio, is the oldest continuously operated refinery in the United States. So we've put about $10 billion in that refinery since USMCA. And then we also, and we have 3,500 Americans working in our facilities every day, the overwhelming majority of whom are U.S. steel workers and boiler makers, et cetera. So everything Canada, U.S. impacts us every day, but also global trade. We have offshore platforms in the Asia Pacific, one off the coast of Taiwan, which we keep a pretty close eye on a regular basis. We're offshore off the coast of Newfoundland. And I'm the U.S. lawyer responsible for all of our international trade and tariffs. So of all the Canadian crude imported to the United States, the majority of that is Cenovus. We're the largest imported crude, both that we use and that we sell to other companies that are really those companies that you don't pull up to a Cenovus gas station in the US, but I assure you, you're pumping Cenovus gas at some of those places, Cenovus crude. But so I'm also responsible for our transportation assets. So whenever there's a change in global trade, I have to know exactly what's happening in the shipping markets and the supply chain. We actually send a lot of maritime crude off the coast of Canada into the US West Coast and the Pacific Northwest. I'm also the officer responsible for all our supply chain procurement for major projects, right? So anytime there's a change in tariffs, we're watching those contracts to see how that pricing changes. And finally, just to make it fun, I'm the cybersecurity lawyer and enterprise security lawyer. So any drone that's flying over our facilities, and I assure you, all of these facilities are being probed by Russia, China, and Iran on a daily basis. So the key is what Will say is I'm originally from Ohio, and any of you that have heard me on these panels is that we kind of predicted this 10 years ago. Is that, you go back, many of us in this room all got to know each other in the post 9/11 days, when Penwar was a leader on the Canada-US border issues. So we had that national security threat, and we had to come together and figure that out. And that took us about 15 years. Then we had the Great Recession and then the recovery. And then this was the missing piece. The fact is that our global trading system, and Victor touched on this as well, trade and geopolitics are mixed, is our global trading system got hooked on non-market economies. Economies that don't play by the same trading rules that we all play by, right? And we were all living on a sugar high. We just have to admit that fact. And then it was the United States in the first Trump administration, but the Biden administration carried that forward. And we've continuing it to this day that said that's enough. And what's interesting is when you want to look at 3 speeches that explain all of what's happening, it's our United States Trade Representative Jameson Greer's speech to the Counsel of Foreign Relations in May. About a week later, our Treasury Secretary's speech to the Reagan Economic Forum. And you could look at Prime Minister Carney's speech at Davos or New York. Pick which one you want. And each one of those person could have given the other person's speech, about 2/3 of them. We are all diagnosing the issue the same way, notwithstanding all of the factors that you're seeing. But on all of the kind of rhetoric, tenor, and tone that you see in Canada, US, we're all diagnosing the same problem. And the most shocking thing is within the last month, the European Union has actually said, we need to do something about non-market economies, which would have been unheard of a decade ago. So the message is we are in the most transformative time in our economy in any of our lifetime. This will make what happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall looks minor in comparison, both in global supply chains, but with AI, data centers, et cetera, and a new security framework that we have. And we better get with it, right? We better figure out how to work together to make this happen. But I'll end right here in saying the one thing that we do stress to our C-suite, and I'm certainly they're on board with this and others, is it's not going back. You just made the great comment, like the way we were used to doing things, it's not going back to the way it was. I think there's always this view that, well, we'll just get through this and we'll get through this US administration and things will change. It's already changed. We're already late to the game and seeing how it's changed. And so, and I'll just use the example of the July 1st renewal and now extension, not extension of the US Canada Mexico agreement. That wasn't just the Trump administration that refused to extend it. It was the United Steelworkers celebrated that, the United Auto Workers and the IBEW all came out and said, we don't want USMCA reviewed either. So if you're sitting around waiting for a Democrat administration, good luck. So this is the trajectory that we're on, and we then have to figure out how to operate within that environment.
Hey, Dan, my guess is those comments will probably generated a few questions, which we'll come back to in a moment. Stephen, over to you. It's on. Just
Am I on? Okay. This is a fascinating topic, and I'm very pleased to be here. Sorry, this threw me off for a second. Full disclosure, I've got very, very close relationships with the United States. My friends, I have 4 grandchildren, 2 daughters, an extended family that live in Washington State and also in Washington, D.C. So very near and dear to my heart to make things work better between our 2 countries. We've heard a lot today about building things. I've lost track of the trillions of dollars that have been said are going to be put into new projects, new infrastructure, AI data centers. The list goes on. At the root of that, and expanding our trade markets. At the root of that are people. You cannot expand your trade without good relationships. People make relationships. You cannot build all of the new things that we want to build without people. The reality of the fact is that 74% of employers on a global basis today say they cannot find the skills that they need for the new economy. We can't train people fast enough for the skills that are required in the new economy. What employers are requiring and looking for is more open movement of their talent. If they've got a project in one country and they need to move people from another country in order to complete that project, they want to do it seamlessly. They want to do it with efficiency and predictability. The challenge that we have today is that our mobility models, and that is immigration, are not fit for purpose. They do not support this new reality. And a big part of that issue is the public narrative that says foreigners come in to our country, they take domestic jobs, and they drive down wages. And business has to work to change that narrative, because we will not be able to accomplish the things that we spoke about, have been speaking about this morning. Canada has done a pretty good job. The parliamentary secretary rhymed off several of the agreements that we've negotiated with other trading nations. We have the European Trade Agreement. We have agreements with Peru, the South American countries. Within those agreements, there are provisions that provide for the more predictable and free flow of mobility, which far surpass the agreement that we have with our largest trading partner. In this era where we are looking at ongoing reviews of the CUSMA or the USMCA, it presents an opportunity for us to revisit some of those things. And if business has certainty in terms of the movement of their people, it will rebuild some of the confidence that they need to have in order to consider the investment decisions to go along with that.
It's a really powerful point. And I want to come back to that to ask about kind of where we are on some of the immigration policies that might be impacting this. But we also got a super interesting question that came up from the audience. So thank you for that. I'll just read it out loud here. America's federal government is pushing to domesticize our economy. That's a word, domesticize. Canada's is pushing to globalize, which will build greater prosperity. And Adam, you're sitting next to me, and I'll give you the hard question, at least for now.
I don't know if the prosperity is for the United States or for Canada or for both, but
Well, I think the question is about the choice of global versus domestic? Where should the focus be?
I think it's an and, like it's not an either or. I mean, obviously President Trump has an agenda where he feels that, and for many reasons, the U.S. has been the world's police force globally. They've been peacekeepers. They've invested in so many of these things and have built a lot of trade relationships. So he's, and Robert Lighthizer wrote a book all about it in terms of free trade, and they feel taken advantage of. So there's a segment of the Americans that feel like they've lost jobs and opportunities. So he does want to rebuild a domestic economy. We are a trading nation. We don't have a population base the size of the Americans, and so we have to do global trade. And I think it's both. I mean, as a former economic developer, I recognize 80% of economic growth happens organically from your existing business base. So focusing on domestic, but then there's still 20% that comes from foreign direct investment, export, trade, development activity. So you have to be doing both. I think to exclude one and focus on the other, you miss out on an aspect of prosperity. So I would argue it's about both. Canada, we recognize that relationship has fractured. We're trying to work it out. And we have been totally complacent and reliant on one trading partner for 80% of our value and volumes. Shame on us. We do need to do better. So we have to find other trading relationships. And as I was going to say in some of my remarks to my American friends, being appropriately apologetic as a Canadian, this isn't we're going to stop trading or doing less trade with the United States. I think everybody wants to do more trade with the United States, and we want to do more trade with the rest of the world. This is not an either or. So we're going to continue to develop our opportunities to develop global trading relationships and continue to nurture that strong relationship we have with the United States.
I think that's really well said. But as we think about some of those global markets, Victor, you spend a lot of time in your role as the president of the Canada-India Business Council, helping businesses diversify beyond traditional markets. So where do you see the greatest opportunities internationally, either in places like India or other jurisdictions? And what will it take for companies in this region to compete successfully?
So I would just answer a little bit of the question before. And the simple adage that I like to think of is capital flows where capital grows. And it's very efficient. And so where we see placement of capital around the world, Canada now has its hand out to say we want to be included in receiving that capital. But a lot of capital has gone in from around the world to the US, and there's a lot of projects happening. But when you look between the talent comment of my colleague Steve on the other side, India is the largest growth market in the world, and it will be for the next number of years. 1.46 billion people. India has an average age of 29 years old. So this market and this workforce is just starting to hum along, and it's going to be there for the next couple decades. If you actually look at this Penwa region, it is one of the richest regions anywhere in the world. If you think of everything from fisheries to oil and gas, to critical minerals, to gold and diamonds, to potash, uranium, you can go right through out, and you talk about in Oregon, the dependence on trade. This jurisdiction has to work together to actually serve these growth markets. Why? Because of the global instability that I talked about that's taking place. I'm getting calls from parts of the world saying, how can we get goods from this region to those other parts? And they need reliable, stable, and hopefully democratic partners to actually get these goods that this region has, again, from farming to critical minerals to the energy to their jurisdictions. And India is one of those countries that has an insatiable appetite for what this region has.
Will that trade agreement between Canada and India help reach that $70 billion goal? Is it reachable without such an agreement?
Canada and India have been working on this for 16 years now. And it looks like that agreement at a comprehensive level will be done later this year. And I think what that agreement will do is provide a level of stability certainty and hopefully a little bit of enthusiasm into the corridor. We've never actually seen the numbers that we should have seen between Canada and India because we trade so much with the US. And to Adam's point, it has to be an and we have to look at these markets. And again, markets that are growing, flourishing, and again, have complementary needs to what this region and specifically Canada has and to what India needs.
Thanks. Very well said. Melisa, maybe I could turn to you because states are really on the front lines of this whole debate and particularly focused on economic development, also on international engagement. But from your perspective, where you sit in Oregon, what are businesses asking for today, and how can states help those businesses navigate the uncertainty while continuing to attract investments and also grow exports? So you have a challenging situation in our federal system for a state to stand up and shine during a difficult moment like this.
Yeah, thank you. When you look at Oregon and you think about the targeted industries and, we work heavily in semiconductor and electronics. We have advanced manufacturing. Our agricultural and food product industry is strong, just to mention a few. And so when I think specifically about those, I think about the supply chain, and I think about how we're going to help support them to diversify where their next partnership or relationship is going to come from, to make sure that they have some certainty for the product that they're wanting to manufacture and generate revenue from. So companies with this uncertainty are really looking for that support in knowing where else they might reach out to, whether that's another global market or whether that's a North American market. And touching back again on this question that we see on the screen, and I think it's really important, it's not an either or. I agree. And I say that from a standpoint that I think we have an opportunity to be thinking about ourselves as North America and what we have to offer one another as a global competitive space in the other global markets. So while we're all, states are individual and provinces are individual, I think when you look at North America as a whole, we do cover so much in terms of richness and wealth, in terms of what we can do. And so our businesses, I think, see that as a place where they're wanting to explore new markets. And it's our job to really be looking at those and introducing them and making relationships, or introducing them to make relationships that I think are more realistic and not theoretical. So businesses are more sophisticated than 30 years ago when I started in the industry of economic development. But that doesn't, to everybody's point on this panel, again, things aren't going to remain stagnant. They're going to continue to change. And I think for us as a state agency, we're attempting to look forward and trying to predict what else is next, what's needed next, and what's the next step. Because if you get behind that, your businesses are going to get behind that. And Oregon, number one, we like to promote and support the businesses we have. We certainly welcome new business to the state, but we recognize expansion and retention as number one and key for us. And so if we can understand their needs, their markets and their demands, and where they're headed for their next expansion and growth, then we have a better shot of making sure we have in our state what those businesses need, or the access to those markets that can provide it.
It's great. You play such a critical role in this story. And as the Lieutenant Governor said about the state of Washington and Michigan and all of our border states play such a critical role during a challenging period. So thank you for what you're doing. Dan, maybe I could go back to you because you raised some important points. You also, I think you've also in your remarks basically talked about how this relationship, US-Canada at least, is about more than just a trade agreement. You talked about how you're company in particular has a lot going on. Some of it may or may not have to do with tariffs or with trade. What would you say as you look out over the next decade? What would you recommend that businesses do, not only to adapt to this changing global landscape, but to strengthen this partnership in particular?
Well, that's a great question, actually, and I think it ties into the question from the audience, and if I can link those two, because I think the idea that the U.S. is just domesticizing its economy and talk of just moving supply chains in is missing the other half of the story. You know, we are wanting in the United States to have whatever strategic assets are, whether that's the big ones, they always list off 5: energy, semiconductors, AI, et cetera. You can go down the list, and steel and aluminum being one of those as well. But at the same time, we just heard from the parliamentary secretary, the U.S. trade representative could have gone up there and given the same speech. The U.S., I was here last year at Penware, not here, but in Bellevue, and I was wrong. I will do something economists don't do. I will admit that I was wrong. I'm a lawyer. I'll admit it. Economists, they predict, and then it goes wrong. Oh, there was changed environment or something, transitory inflation. But the issue is that I said last July, we were supposed, if we remember, the Liberation Day tariffs, and we were supposed to have trade deals with all the major countries by the end of July. And we were sitting there the third week of July. And I said, of the big 5, Canada, Mexico, the European Union, Korea, and Japan, will they all hold together and say, we're not going to bend to the United States, or will one cut a deal first and then the rest will fall? And I predicted it would be Korea and Mexico. I was wrong. A week later, Japan cut the deal because there was a lot of domestic politics going on there. Then the EU followed, Korea came along, and then we're still sitting here as Canada and Mexico. But it's important to note that the tariffs that are now in place as temporary tariffs after the Supreme Court decision expire this week. They will be replaced with more durable tariffs based on forward labor. Those will not be reversed by courts, and those will be in place into perpetuity. So there will be a 10% to 12% global tariff, like President Trump promised on the campaign trail. We have cut 20 trade deals with 75% of the trade with the United States, right? Those are all there. But what they did is every one of those deals said, you want access to the U.S. market, you got to knock down your trade barriers. So the companies that come to our state resources now don't have to deal with non-tariff barriers and registration requirements. So that, and we are actually seeing U.S. exports tick up right now. And so those trade deals, now we still, like everybody else, are waiting for a trade deal with India. The U.S. thinks they'll have that done by the end of the month. Good luck. And will Brazil and Vietnam are the other 2 ones that are out there. But unsurprisingly, we have 2 tariff investigations on who? Brazil and Vietnam, that the homework's being done on. So the U.S. is kind of getting all that it wants, and then that's when it's going to pivot. And we're negotiating, as you heard the ambassador say this morning, we're in Mexico this week, the USTR is. The ambassador basically let it slip. There's another negotiating round scheduled for August. We're negotiating 48 issues with Mexico right now, and then they're going to get done with that and look at Canada and say, where you at? Right? That's going to be what happens. And that will happen this fall. So we're not waiting another year on USMCA. That's going to happen. And if I'm wrong, I'll come back next year and admit I was wrong on that. Okay. But that's the piece. So as a business, what we're looking at right now is, as all this shakes out, where are those opportunities? Because we're cutting trade deals around the world. And additionally, let's not forget the myth of the Trump administration. And I work with Republicans and Democrats. Don't take this as a Trump administration, but read the Federal Register. The myth is that they're disorganized. These guys are very organized. They are making change. The Federal Register notice comes out 5 times a day. The level of regulations that they're changing within the bowels of government arguably is reducing permitting, making things more competitive. The big, beautiful bill on tax side, this potentially could be a very competitive environment in which to do business vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And they're looking for those partnerships with allies around the world. So, but we still have a lot of work to do. One huge miss is what we're doing on the movement of people. It's a huge miss for us on that talent agenda. So I actually think this is a time that, as everything's shaking up, businesses, we're all looking to see where those opportunities are. But if you sit back and just say, oh, it's disorganized, it's chaos, I don't understand it all, you're missing the message. It's actually well orchestrated if you understand what they're trying to do. And that's the key. You got to get beyond the noise. You got to get beyond the true socials. And then when you actually look at the policy, it actually starts to make a little bit of sense. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying if you know what they're doing, that creates the business opportunities.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. It was an important set of points. Yeah.
Does that, and that creates such a lot of uncertainty where there's so much going on. Business can't keep up with all of the changes that you've just described.
Well, I think that was one point I was going to make. I heard a couple times people say we're not going back. Well, I think, going back to a rules-based order with some architecture, predictability, and stability where all the countries are at the table and not just two is something I think that also has to be debated by the international community. So, and the voices of the working population, whether you're in Edmonton or Ohio or Pennsylvania, I think we're a bit late to the table. I mean, those voices have been speaking up since the late 70s and early 80s. So the speeches of the last kind of 12 or 14 months seem to be just catching up, I would say. Stephen, I wanted to ask you about the immigration points and the shortage of labor, because that's what you stated. How do we get to a place where we're back kind of supporting the innovation, supporting the business agenda? What would you say to governments or to populations? What do you say about what's needed to make economies really function from a worker mobility perspective?
Well, there's two countries in the world that our population is aging right around the globe. There's only two areas of the world where the population is stable or increasing. That's Africa and India. India, very smart approach to this. They are forging agreements with Australia, Germany, Switzerland, where they are becoming actually an exporter of talent into those countries. And so the countries are lining up to take advantage of that. They are making agreements with India in order to facilitate the movement of those people. At the same time, they're also figuring out ways in which they can recognize credentials, because that's another important part of this equation. If you can, I remember Jean Charest, premier in Quebec, and he said in 2012, when we were talking about some of you may remember this, the Beyond the Border Action Plan, which is when I think we first got working with Penwa. And he said, if you can fix a broken leg or a pipe in Paris, then you can fix a broken leg or a pipe in Montreal. And so we've tried to, we need to figure out ways in which we can also recognize credentials. And I think that needs to be left a little bit more to the employer as opposed to agencies. We know the skills that you need in your organizations. And I think we need to put more of that in front of employers. In two words, I think it's efficiency and predictability. If I am sending an engineer to cross the border between Canada and the US, I should be able to know precisely that engineer is going to be able to enter into the US or Canada. Sadly, that's not the situation today. You can have a situation where you've got exactly the same case and it will be a different outcome. And we need to, those are the things where I think we've got opportunities to fix things. And I just give a shout out to Penwa. Thank you very much. We'll be releasing the results of our cross-border mobility survey this week. And thank you very much for supporting that important survey, because it does show that there are opportunities outside of the regulatory process where we can make tangible improvements in the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. And this strikes close to home for me. I would just say my own family's story is one of 2 or 3 governments actually supporting my mom and my dad in their journey, right? It was I go back and look at the correspondence now that my dad had written to the US ambassador of India asking for a visa appointment and how nervous he was about coming to the United States and then to Canada. And I go back and I look at all the correspondence to Canadian immigration authorities about what he would be doing, where he would be teaching, what high school he would be teaching at, and then he was going to stay to get his PhD. But they were enormously thorough and they were enormously fair. And again, 2, 3 generations later, all I can say is thank you to the Canadian government for that. Adam, I want to come back to you and I want to bring it back to Alberta a little bit because Alberta has long been an export-driven economy. If you think about today's environment, what policies or investments would have the greatest impact on strengthening Alberta's, and by extension, North America's global competitiveness?
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, thanks, Rich. It may not be a policy, but I would say the best decision the Albertans can make would be to remain in Canada on October 19th. I think I'll start off saying that. Alberta's been very privileged in the sense that privilege sounds kind of the wrong word, but the tariff issues have affected Alberta probably the least of any province. Our export profile is that the vast majority are CUSMA compliant, unlike our friends in Ontario and Quebec. So it's always, I have to remind myself all the time that we are very much coming out less scathed than many others. I sort of think in terms of policies and choices, investments across a couple dimensions. The first would be the tangible economy, or very much our resource economy. Victor's talked about a trade agreement with India. He and I worked together a few weeks ago to host the High Commissioner, and his words are basically, "I'll buy everything you can sell me." And that's oil, that's LNG, that's agriculture products, fertilizer, potash, you name it. Our challenge is we can't get enough of it to him fast enough. So we have to ensure that we expand our trade infrastructure, make those investments quickly, and there's no reason a major project in Canada's regulatory review process should take more than, frankly, a year, maximum. I don't even want to say 2 because that gives some leeway. We're competing with the United States, Victor, as you said. Capital goes where capital grows. And if they're making decisions on major projects in the United States within months, we need to be competitive with that. So the regime in Canada needs to change. Heartened to see Bill C5, but it's now time to make sure every project in Canada faces that. You look at some of the major investments that are happening on the trade infrastructure standpoint. Alexa was up earlier talking about the Port of Vancouver's Gateway Strategy, referred to the MPO as a newly minted director of the Port Board. I'm extremely excited about that. We've got the Prairie Economic Gateway project outside Calgary. We've got Edmonton Airport's International Cargo Hub. These are critical pieces. And I totally agree with Alexa's comments earlier. We've got some labor challenges and realities around both port and rail that we need to solidify. So making sure the legislation is shifted to create stability and certainty in our supply chains. On the intangible economy side, Penwar region is actually kind of a very strong AI hub. If you think about it largely from a geographical standpoint, Edmonton is very much an AI hub for Canada. Amy is centered here. University of Alberta has some of the strongest research capabilities in North America for AI. Washington State with Amazon and Microsoft increasingly growing in capability. There's no reason why the Pacific Northwest region couldn't be an AI hub, but AI for good, not evil. And to figure out how do we do it to drive economic development, investment, deliver better performance, deliver better productivity, deliver better intelligence, and use it for the power of good. Because that is we're gonna have to also protect the critical infrastructure. It's, as every cybersecurity expert tells you, it's a matter of when, not if. And I increasingly worry about the stability of our critical infrastructure systems from an AI hacking, nefarious actor standpoint. And you with Mastercard, I'm sure want to make sure that doesn't affect your customers either. And then finally, I would say on the ability to build, again, the regulatory piece, but we also have to be competitive again in Canada with our neighbors to the south. So making it so that we can have accelerated capital depreciation in year one of that major investment will incent those investments from happening from energy standpoint, data center standpoint. All of that will be critical so that boards can make final investment decisions for these major projects. And then finally, I'll support Stephen and his perspective on the people side, because when I talk to my members about these major projects, whether it is West Coast Pipeline, the Pathways Project, data centers, the excitement is in their first statement, and then the second one is usually, Adam, I just don't know where we're going to find the people to build these projects. And so we have to fix the talent pipeline in Alberta, both from a domestic standpoint, get more kids excited and energized around the skilled trades and give them exposure to that at a younger age, because it's very school dependent whether they do get exposure to the trade side. And that we should be able to have teachers and parents encouraging kids to go into the skilled trades. And a dad of a welding apprentice, I'm very proud and excited for him. But we also need to change the immigration scoring system. The joke that I have is that a PhD in Latin gets higher marks on the immigration scoring system than a heavy-duty mechanic or a welder. None of my members are asking for PhDs in Latin. A lot of them are asking for heavy-duty mechanics and welders. So we need to fix the scoring system as well.
That's really, really well said, Adam. It sounds like you might do this for a living. Is that, yeah?
A little bit.
A little bit. Okay. All right. We've got 6 minutes left, and I've got maybe a question for the group. And Dan, I'm going to not read the full question on the screen that starts with Dan is 100% correct. I'll just leave it at that. So a concluding question for the group, and Victor and Melissa, I'll start with you. If you could recommend one action that governments and one action that businesses should prioritize over the next 5 years to strengthen North America's position in the global economy, what would it be?
That's a good question. I would say that, Adam mentioned it, 7 out of the 10 jurisdictions of Penware are export driven. I mentioned some of the resources that we have. We must get those goods to the markets of the world that need them. This is not just a nice to do. This is the actual increase in socioeconomic mobility of these jurisdictions. And they, critically need a lot of the products that this jurisdiction has. So trade enabling infrastructure from a government perspective, partnering, of course, with the private sector. And then I would say from the business standpoint, to understand the change that I mentioned before, that it's now not an economic driven world, it's a geopolitical driven world. And we need to partner with governments to navigate the geopolitics to actually move significant economic projects forward. And I think as you look at markets like India, everyone thinks India is an emerging market. And it is an emerging market in some sense, but I would not classify it as that. If you look at pre-British rule, it was 25% of global trade. 25, a quarter of global trade. So really it's the reemergence as it moves to the third largest economy in the world. We want this jurisdiction to be tied to markets like that and for mutual prosperity.
Great. Melissa.
Yeah, so
Just keep talking.
I'll keep talking. There we go. So when I look at my top line themes for our panel discussion today and think about your question, I think states cannot, certainly we cannot create the federal trade policy, but we can endeavor to create practical certainty for businesses. Diversification is not a retreat from North America. It's how we make North American businesses more resilient. And trade policy may be national, but trade impacts are local. So when you think about what government, at least state government, can be doing, it's a sense of, looking at ourselves as trying to be more efficient and moving at the speed of business and what the business needs and understanding what the business needs are. providing good access for them to the information and relationships they need to continue to grow with certainty. And I think finally, when you look at just generally speaking across trade for North America, this question, I don't even want to touch this question where you're 100% right, Dan. Not because I disagree, but I think there is this question leans into Canada in the sense of putting egos aside, but I think there's some paralysis on the US side as well. And so I think we really have to remind ourselves that we do know what we're doing in trade. We've been in this business a while. And even though things have shifted and changed, I think that's a healthy place to grow and continue to support the economy of North America.
That's great. I'm going to go Stephen, Dan, and Adam. And if you each have 30 seconds to go. Yes? Dan, Stephen?
Yeah, I'll just say very quickly, and I know we have a USMCA trade panel later, so, and maybe they took all the liquor into that one that was still on the table. I don't know what that was all about today, but you gotta love Pete. But I will just say that I think they're a shared interest where too much of what we're doing right now is focused on disputes, right? And governments and politics, that generates a lot of energy. I think, I ran trade associations. That's how you get your membership dollars. I say that with love, right? And I was an external legal counsel and lobbyist, et cetera. Everybody focuses on what we can fix, that's a rough edge, and do that. And I think we need to take a timeout for a second and say, what actually is working very well and how do we make it better? And so, for example, we feed ourselves in North America. That's our strategic advantage. What can we actually do on ag that makes sense so we don't run into these problems again? On energy, we now have 3 respective governments focused on using all of our energy resources. Let's figure out how to and we also have a problem where the US says there's a deficit with Canada in our trade deficit. It's overwhelmingly energy. So why don't we come up with a solution that says, hey, if I'm pulling it out of the ground in one country and refining it in the other, and I'm the same company, why does that count against the trade deficit? Right? Like, let's work on creative solutions like that so that we can actually have a model that fits the economic model, particularly that we have in North America. We don't make a widget there and sell it over there, right? That's just not how we do it. We're a fully integrated economy, and we need to start acting like one and measuring ourselves like one and having a conversation like one. And some people dispute this when I say this. I actually think we could get there with the leadership in the 3 countries we have right now. We just have to learn to speak that way as the business community to those folks as well. And that's where Penware is a very important vehicle for doing so. That was 45, but go.
Yeah.
I think it's, if it ain't broke, why fix it? And the agreement was working pretty good. Right? There were some irritants, but they could be fixed. And when we were talking last week, preparing for this, Dan, you made that good point that said, let's find the opportunities. Okay, they've not walked away from the agreement. The agreement is still there. They're going to be annual reviews. So can we take those reviews as an opportunity to fix those irritants? And let's fix Chapter 16 of the labor mobility provisions while they're doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam, 10 seconds.
I think Jameson Greer characterized some of the parts of USMCA as load-bearing walls. And I think the thing that we're doing is we're focusing on all those things that are the irritants and the places where we have conflict. I'd say let's build and have Canada acknowledge and work with the United States and Mexico to say, these are the common load-bearing walls that we have. And let's build off a place of agreement on the positive things that will always stay in place, and then chip away at some of the things that we don't necessarily agree on.
That's great. Let me thank all of you. Let me thank Penware. Let me just remind people, this trading block, this North American trading block is the envy of the world. It can get better with all of you and with such talent and such great ideas. I'm actually quite confident about the road ahead and all that you're going to do to lift people up. Thank you to my Mastercard colleagues for inviting me here and making this happen, and to Penware. And that concludes this trade panel. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you.